So you join me today in Southern California where I'm testing out the new 2020 Mazda CX-30 on the launch event for this new subcompact crossover. So what exactly is the Mazda CX-30? Well, it's the second vehicle of this new wave of revitalizations of Mazda's lineup. The new generation Mazda 3 was the first, and this CX-30 rides on the exact same platform as that car. And if you're familiar with the Mazda 3, you're going to be very familiar with this one. It has the new design language, the updated Kodo on the outside, and the layout of the interior is very similar. But there's some initial confusion on what this car actually is. Firstly, it is a subcompact crossover, but it doesn't replace the CX-3. It's larger in almost every dimension, but actually just as tall as that car. It comes with a lot more space in the rear. Getting behind the wheel, you can really feel that on the inside, and the footprint overall is much larger. So one of the first questions asked is, why is this called a CX-30 and not a CX-4? First reason for that, there's already a CX-4 that exists in China, which is a coupe version of the CX-5. And if you're a potential customer and you know nothing about that Chinese model, you're probably going to get confused when you type in CX-4 and could see this car and that Chinese version together. So a new name and an extra digit added on, does that mean that the upcoming CX-3 becomes the CX-20 and the CX-5 comes the CX-50? We don't know as of yet. Mazda wasn't able to give any sort of answer in that regard. So let's hop into the cabin space and talk about everything that is featured in this CX-30, and then we'll be taking it for a quick drive on the highway and some fun back roads to see how this Mazda stacks up against other cars in its segment. So this is the interior of the Mazda CX-30, and things that I want to quickly address. I'm 6'4", and for my perfect driving position, I feel like I've got enough space in this car. There's an element that I'm going to touch upon later when driving that I think would affect the way that tall people feel behind the wheel, but when it comes to a comfort standpoint, everything is fantastic. Here we're in the GT model, the top trim for Canada, and we've got the brown leather appointments. So how the interior is laid out, like I said, is very much like the new generation Mazda 3. So things that you do like or don't like in that car are going to carry over into this one. For example, I love the way that the climate control is laid out. Very simple, few buttons here, and then the rotary wheel setup for the Mazda Connect is exactly the same. Something that could potentially turn people away from the new Mazda 3 and the CX-30 is that this 8.8-inch screen that has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration isn't a touchscreen. There's no way to interact with it at all with your fingertip. You have to resort to this system down here. I'm a Mazda owner. I get in plenty of cars in Mazdas, BMWs that have the rotary wheel setup, and for me it's as fluent as the English language, just trying to figure out my way through all of the subsystems and interacting with Apple CarPlay. So I think you shouldn't be totally turned off that this car doesn't have a touchscreen. Give this 10 minutes of your time, really figure out how each movement interacts with the screen, and I'm sure you'll be all right. The brown leather is found along this sliding armrest, and just along the sides it's nicely padded, and the seats are black, but the material underneath the perforation is brown, so it has this very interesting effect. Other things that I like about this cabin, the steering wheel is thin and the buttons are just no nonsense. Here we have the digital instrument cluster in the GT model and the heads-up unit that projects into the screen as well. Canada, we are getting 3 trims, the GX, the GS, and the GT. Canadians, pay attention. When it comes to the GX, we're getting the 2-litre engine, which has 155 horsepower, and in that base level, you can option up all-wheel drive for $2,000 if you so desire. Going into the GS and the GT, you then get the 2.5-litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine. And with the GT model specifically, it comes with cylinder deactivation. Again, I'll talk about that a little more when we're driving. Another thing to point out with all-wheel drive is that for the GS and the GX, it's a $2,000 upgrade, but for the GT, all-wheel drive is the only way that you can have it. And no matter what trim, what drivetrain, the 6-speed automatic transmission is the only way the car is going to shift gears. In general, I love the way these new interiors are set up. They feel very modern and clean. All of the things that you interact with feel expensive, and like, look at the dampening on that glove box. Is that or is that not quality? So when we get into the rear seats, this is where someone like me really suffered in the Mazda CX-30, where there's almost no space for me to get comfortable behind myself. Here, not as much of an issue. It is tight back there for 6-footers, but if you're in the position of buying this car because you're a young single individual, or maybe you've just started a family and baby seats in the back is really all you're putting in there, I don't think it's going to be much of an issue at all. There's actually a little indent into the rear, so you'll see that there's a good amount of space that can help out taller passengers when it comes to headroom. A couple of adjustable vents down below that loom over that substantial drivetrain hump. So you can fit 2 taller passengers back there, but I think you're just going to want to keep it to 2 rather than 3. And you'll notice that the window doesn't go all the way down. That's a little pet peeve of mine when it comes to cars. Other things in the back, you can fold down the seat 60-40 from behind the seat, or when you're just reaching through the door, they have that little push down tab. And then the trunk space offers up a lot more of an opening window to get things in and out than the CX-3. As of right now, we don't have official cargo numbers from Mazda. Hopefully that's something that will come along before the embargoes. So if I'm rambling on for no good reason and there's just text below telling you what these numbers are versus the CX-3, well, then I'm just wasting my breath. A few other tidbits to note. There is a spare tyre underneath the false floor, and the doors don't totally cover the sills. That's a little bit disappointing. And there is a new off-road traction mode that has debuted here in the CX-30 and will soon be coming along to the 2020 CX-9 and the CX-5 turbos. It's to be used only when you're doing proper off-roading in any of these new crossovers. It's a reactive system more than it is a proactive system, so whenever it will feel one of the wheels slip, the differentials will shift the power to where it has the most grip and help you out when the worst of the worst comes along. So then that, I think, wraps up everything that I want to talk about here in the Mazda CX-30. Let's now get on the road and offer up some first driving impressions of this subcompact crossover. So first impressions behind the wheel of this CX-30. It does feel like a softer vehicle than the new Mazda 3. I can feel a little more travel in the suspension, and with these latest generation of Mazda vehicles, they were aware that their cars were riding on the firmer side. Maybe that doesn't appeal to all consumers, so they've gone to lengths to make these cars feel more comfortable on the road, but maybe not necessarily cushier. What I think is the most noticeable aspect of my drive so far is the visibility in the CX-30. The greenhouse, I think, is quite small. For my height, I feel like I'm kind of looking straight into the frame here along the roof liner. I have to duck down a little bit to see the sky out of the side window. Rear visibility isn't all that bad. One of the big complaints I had of the Mazda 3 hatchback is that blind spot was significant. I remember getting into that car for the very first time. I had to merge onto a highway on the other side of the road, and I had to ask my passenger in the front seat if she could help me see if there was someone coming up and behind. I really couldn't tell. Here it isn't as bad, to be expected of most subcompact crossovers, in all honesty. There's a tiny little quarter window, so the rear visibility isn't all that bad. The rear glass is wide enough as well that I don't feel like the visibility is cramped at all. As I mentioned earlier, this GT has the 2.5 litre engine with cylinder deactivation. That will cut off cylinders 1 and 4 when you're in very light loads of highway driving. There's nothing that comes up here on the screen to say when the cylinder deactivation is engaged, and I haven't been able to feel it at all so far, but if you go through the system menu here on the 8.8 inch screen, you can see if that system has engaged or not. The 2.5 litre engine that we have in the CX-30 is the most powerful engine as of right now for the subcompact class, 186 horsepower and the same number in pound-feet of torque. The 6-speed automatic transmission is the same unit we've seen in countless other Mazda products. Yeah, it doesn't have as many gears as a lot of the modern products, and I know people's immediate thought is, how does that aid in efficiency? We don't have the official fuel economy numbers yet for the CX-30, but much like all of the other products where I have this 6-speed automatic, fuel efficiency hasn't been anything below average. Really, to continue using this unit is perfectly fine by me. It's refined, we've got paddles behind the steering wheel, there's a manual shifting mode when you slide the gear shifter over to the side. It's refined, it gears down quickly when you put your foot down, just like that, to gather up a little bit more speed. So all in all, the CX-30 is a familiar car in many ways, but a nice surprise as well. This is unfortunately where the audio cut out of my microphone, where I was just about to throw the CX-30 down a beautiful bit of road here in Palm Desert. So things to address with the driving dynamics of the CX-30, just like the CX-3, it does have a solid beam rear axle, which I think will upset some enthusiasts. But if the Mazda 3 proves anything, just like the CX-30, you don't have too much to concern yourself about. Yes, over the roughest bits of road or expansion joints on a bridge, something like that, that's where you can really tell it's a solid beam rear axle, where the rear of the car really over dramatizes those uneven surfaces. But I promise that the CX-30 isn't dynamically ruined by this. In sport mode, it's fun to drive, it'll keep the revs higher up at 3,000, 4,000 RPM so that you can reach peak power sooner, and using the shift paddles behind the steering wheel are responsive, they listen to you quite well. There's a little bit of body roll, of course, this is still a crossover, but it's a fun one, and that's something that I think we've been lacking for a while in this segment. So that wraps up my thoughts and my impressions after my quick time behind the wheel of the Mazda CX-30. I'm not going to give it my full judgment just yet, as I would really like to test it out in my environment and see how it stacks up against conditions that I know. But if you're shopping for a subcompact crossover, I highly suggest that you wait a month until these cars show up in the dealerships mid-January in Canada to take it for a test drive. So that's been everything from me. Thank you so much for taking the time to watching this video. Please like it if you liked it, and share it if you think other people will like it too. And if you wouldn't mind hitting that subscribe button just down below, that does the world for me. Hope to see you again here on The Drive Guide. Thanks again. So this is what I'm referring to when I'm talking about a new suitcase. This is my old one, which unbelievably, I mean, it's had a good few years, but unbelievably, I was zipping it up after one day, and this zipper broke. See, it's only on one set of teeth there. Sad. I then went to reach for the other one, and it zipped around and filled it up very nicely. But then on the way back, when I was unzipping it, it ripped again. Both of them were on one set of teeth, and I could not figure it out to save my life. So I was carrying this in my arms like a dead dog, and Mazda offered to help me out. So got another carry-on that fits everything just as well. God bless you guys. God bless you.